We know that wearing a badge is usually done to keep law-abiding citizens safe and enable them to lead worry-free lives. Unfortunately, not all lawbreakers can be stopped without physical action. Sometimes, however, law enforcers may make a wrong estimate about the physical force necessary, ending up in police brutality. Today, we will take a look at 20 shocking police brutality incidents that were caught on camera. Number 1. Handcuffed man trowed around. Police brutality can happen in essentially any moment of investigation, during the arrest, or any other similar experience. In this particular case, we will see that a suspect has already been apprehended and has cuffs placed on him. This, however, doesn't seem to be enough for the police officer who was moving the suspect toward the car. Instead, he feels it right to throw this man on the ground. As the man fell, we saw him nearly hitting his head on the pavement. As the suspect fell, we even see the police officer getting quite close to the man's face and telling him in a threatening manner that he fell and that that's all there is to it. Regardless of how serious the charges against this man are, we are left with the question of whether it is okay to treat someone in such a manner. Throughout the rest of the video, if we pay attention, we can even notice that the suspect is crying. While we would be just guessing if this was due to the fall and the pain that it must have caused, we can certainly tell that there was more than one officer here who noticed exactly what had happened. Number 2. Police car pushes citizens. In this next video, we will discover that not all police brutality has to be carried out by hand. Instead, what we will see is that cops can even use vehicles to exert unnecessary and unreasonable force upon civilians that they're supposed to protect. As the masses have gathered, we see them certainly acting quite violently towards the police officers in these vehicles. Still, we don't feel it is okay to drive through masses in such a way. Number 3. A woman who was assaulted in the middle of a police station. Besides the streets, we will see in this next example that not even being in the middle of a police station will make you entirely safe. This woman was brought in because she was found sleeping in her car, and she refused to do tests for alcohol. After she was brought in, we will see that she received quite bad treatment from this officer, who was later convicted of assaulting the woman. Right in the station lobby, he started showing the aggressive behavior that would lead to the incident. He first drags the woman across the floor and pushes her quite brutally into her cell. The woman fell and hurt her head, which was even later shown in the footage. She was bleeding and required stitches, which were later provided. This case will also shine a light on the fact that sometimes officers are those who report their colleagues when they notice excessive force being used. This is exactly how this brutal cop was brought to justice. Number 5. A transgender demonstrator punched in the face. As we move on to this next video, we could try to place ourselves in the cop's perspective. When we are thinking in this way, it may be easier for us to understand that their job doesn't always have to be pleasant. Naturally, we can all agree that respecting human rights is a must, and that we should all be able to express our opinions. Then again, when you're a cop, demonstrations may not be where you have the most fun. The cops showed up on the scene to find a protesting group. In this particular protest, all of the opinions were screamed, even using a megaphone right in the officers' faces. Even though at one moment it seemed as if the cop was about to take off, things get complicated, and we see that the officer is getting moving to get closer to one of the demonstrators. There's a lot of screaming and panic spreading around, but it all culminates at the moment that this officer punches one of the people who were present, and it happens to be a transgender person. Then a cop with a dog shows up at the scene, and we see that the person who received the punch is being cuffed and taken away along with other protesters. Number 6. A woman arrested despite having a diabetic attack. We already commented that cops definitely don't have an easy job, but we also feel that this doesn't give them the right to be ignorant of the situation. Luckily, the laws apply to all of us, so even if you're a cop and you ignore some aspect of the situation on purpose, you get a punishment. In this next case, we will see that a woman who was being arrested happened to have a diabetic attack right at that unfortunate moment. Since she had this happen to her, her car ended up hitting another vehicle, and this is how the officers found her. However, they thought it was the effect of alcohol that had made her do it, so they showed her quite an unpleasant treatment by throwing her on the ground and cuffing her. Even as she is having this serious health issue, we notice that she is left there on the ground for quite a while. Luckily, the paramedics quickly acted and prevented serious consequences. Number 7. Cops ignore a woman screaming for help as she is being bitten by ants. Regardless of what the circumstances may be, isn't it natural that we should all pay attention when someone is screaming for help right next to us? For these officers, this doesn't seem to be the case. The incident started as the woman made an illegal turn trying to drop off her son at school. This trip, however, soon turned into a nightmare since she was pulled over. After a warning that she was making an illegal turn, the woman was released, but as the officer later claims, he noticed her pulling in reverse. The cop then felt he had no choice but to block the woman's car and cuff her right on the school grounds. As they were arresting this woman back in 2021, she was unfortunately placed somewhere where ants could get to her, and considering how fiercely they attacked her, it seems they were quite irritated. The whole time that this woman is screaming, we see multiple cops just standing around and doing nothing. Even though they didn't hurt the woman directly, they also did nothing to help her, which resulted in quite serious consequences for the woman's face. Number 8. Drunk driver handled roughly by a police sergeant. What we keep getting back to through all these videos we have seen is that we in no way support the idea that those who are breaking the law should be released easily. Still, there's definitely a balance that should be upheld regarding the amount of force used to subdue suspects depending on the situation. In this next case that we bring you, we will see a drunken driver who was being apprehended. The dash cam of the police car has caught this unacceptable behavior from an officer. Even though the man was not resisting the arrest and accepted to be cuffed, the police officer decided to create some drama by throwing the man on the ground and started throwing punches. Even a taser was thrown into the game, and all of this is why the cop has lost his job. Number 9. Officer slaps a woman at an airport. In the previous case, the suspect who was harassed wasn't aggressive toward the cop, but the following one is somewhat different. In the next video that we show you, the woman certainly acts up and gets into a screaming contest with a police officer working at an airport. These two have gotten into quite a fight, and we see them screaming at each other, swinging their hands all around. At first, the man seems to take this quite stoically, but his unsuitable temper shows in a second as he lands quite a powerful slap on the woman's face. Even though the man was provoked and taunted, we don't feel someone wearing a badge should be as easily thrown off. The force used is still not appropriate. Number 10. Off-duty cop punches a driver right in the face. We have seen that in their work, cops are sometimes tested very harshly, and that these nerve-wracking situations can sometimes end with too much force being used on suspects. While we recognize that in the previous video, the man was clearly provoked by a woman, it doesn't give him the right to act in such a way. Simply put, we don't believe someone's temper should be an excuse for violence, especially not when they're wearing a uniform. In the following video, we will see that even off-duty cops can sometimes feel entitled and act in unpredictable ways. What happened here was that a guy was driving a car, and since he wanted to make a turn, he honked at the man who had blocked him from doing so. The man then exits the car, and after a brief argument, he feels it is okay to punch the man right in the face. Weirdly enough, it seems the dog actually predicted what was about to happen. Luckily, even though he was punched, this man decides it's best to avoid confrontation. Instead, he informs the authorities about the incident. Imagine his surprise when he later finds out that the man who sucker punched him was actually an officer of law. To be fair, once he was caught, he didn't lie about it and confessed immediately. Number 11. Officer gets provoked into punching a woman. In this next case, we will examine another situation where a cop was provoked into an unsightly behavior by a suspect. This woman was brought into a hospital by police officers, and the man's body camera caught the whole incident. While we aren't going to claim that this woman wasn't rude and quite verbally unpleasant towards both the officer and the nurse, we definitely condone what happened after. As she was being asked questions, the woman kept spitting all around, and at one point, we saw her spit directly at the cop. Almost immediately, he throws a punch. Naturally, we wouldn't expect him to be too polite towards someone who's spitting at him. However, being an officer of law, we do not expect him to be punching a cuffed woman either. This is why the case is treated as an inappropriate use of force. Number 12. A woman is punched multiple times by an officer. While the reason for this whole situation may not seem as serious, its outcome definitely is. This event started out as a dispute between a woman and a McDonald's worker. After the cops were called to the scene, they arrived to find this woman quite disturbed by what happened, and they first started talking to her. After they had collected her whole story, the officers decided to issue her a trespass notice, but the woman didn't feel this was appropriate and fair. Even though she got emotional about this outcome, we don't see that the woman has given officers a reason to treat her as badly as they ended up treating her. After she told them her name, the officers decided to arrest her, which she didn't approve of. This quickly turned into a brawl where two officers were handling this woman. One of them pulled out a taser and handcuffs, which seems to have further destabilized the situation. The woman was still screaming as the first punch landed on her face. Unfortunately, it wasn't the last one she would receive on this occasion. The cop persisted in punching her 3 times, justifying his action as appropriate since he was trying to subdue her and she was resisting. Even as she's being put in the police vehicle, we see that the woman is heavily injured and even bleeding. All the while, she's still trying to tell the officers that she didn't attack them and wasn't resisting the officers. Number 13. A cop punches a handcuffed woman multiple times. Similarly to the previous video, the officer in the following one also doesn't appear to have any issue with hitting a woman. In this scary footage, we see that a woman is handcuffed but truly still quite violent. She unsuccessfully tries kicking the officer a few times before he decides to retaliate. This retaliation, however, turned out to be quite unnecessarily brutal. As the woman is set against the wall, these punches to her body and head must have had a fearsome strength to them. We even see that there are multiple officers simply observing what is going on. After receiving these brutal punishments, the woman slides down to the ground. If all of this wasn't enough to help us realize how improper these officers' behavior was, we could even see that none of them cared to check and see if the woman was okay or even conscious. Right next to them, her head slowly lowers onto the ground, and none of the present officers care to verify her well-being. Number 14. Police brutality leads to serious consequences. In this next video, we bring you another similar situation to the one that we just saw. A woman was cuffed and placed against the walls. Similarly to the one from the previous video, she is also surrounded by multiple officers when one of them decides to throw her on the ground. As she fell, she hit her head on the hard concrete below. Imagine how severe the damage from this hit must have been. We can recognize that the woman is not moving, and we see that panic spreads among the officers when they realize this and that a trail of blood is left behind her. Still, none of them appear to be running to help her, and later they even claimed the fall was her own fault. Number 15. A teenage girl brutally pulled out of the car. By now, we have certainly witnessed enough cases of police brutality to know that essentially anyone could fall victim to this unfair treatment. In the following video, the victim of police brutality is a teenager. What happened before this girl was stopped was that the officer noticed her speeding and decided to pull her over. She happened to have stopped at a nearby gas station, and after blocking her car with his own vehicle, the officer walked over to her window. They started talking. However, it wasn't long before the cop abruptly opened her car door and violently pulled the girl out of the car, pushing her onto the ground and quickly pinning her. An interesting detail that can be noticed through the officer's body cam is that the girl's ID fell out of either her hands or pockets as he pulled her out. We can say that even if this wasn't a case involving a teenager, this amount of force was certainly uncalled for and unnecessary. After placing the girl in the police vehicle, the cop proceeds to explain to her that she was pulled over for reckless driving and lacking headlights, but he then claims that all of this ruckus could have been avoided if she had listened to the cop and provided him with the ID that he required from her. Even if all of this was a complete truth, it still doesn't give this officer the right to treat anyone so brutally. Number 16. A female officer gets violent as she is patting down suspects. In this next video, we bring you a weird case of police brutality. While it could seem like a fantasy for boys to be patted down by female officers, these two definitely had their hopes crushed. And as you will soon see, it wasn't just their hopes that got crushed. Whatever that situation was, it must have been quite a serious one, considering that people were lined up against the wall and an officer was patting them down. However, once she gets to the vulnerable parts, she seems to get quite harsh, essentially throwing punches right between the boy's legs. The second suspect, whose pockets she pats down, has received the same treatment no less than twice. If the prejudice present in society has made you think, so what? Consider how you would feel if it was a man patting down women in a similar manner. Number 17. A cop breaks a woman's arm while trying to put her under arrest. We have witnessed some quite rough treatments by now. This next video is no different. This woman that was being placed under arrest got quite wordy when the cop wanted to put cuffs on her. She kept repeating that she couldn't go with him immediately since she had children and asked to be left alone. There are multiple officers at the scene, and even though she doesn't want to go and can be seen resisting arrest, we could argue whether the force used was justified. At one moment, push comes to shove, and we see officers pulling the woman's arm around. What tells that serious harm has been done is her frantic screaming that started exactly at the moment that this officer twisted her arm. Even though she was crying and claiming that her arm was broken, the officers proceeded to put cuffs on her, still moving the injured hand around. What could this be but brutality, considering how cops did nothing to prevent this woman's pain and prolonged suffering? Number 18. A woman's face is slammed against a cement floor. In the multiple videos from this list, we have seen how unfortunate things can be when someone's fall is welcomed by a hard floor. We can safely say that the following case brings this to another level. What started out as a polite conversation with this woman turned into a violent encounter very soon. As the officer tried to put cuffs on her, he seemed to have applied too much force, and the woman ended up slamming her face right into the hard cement floor. Even as the woman's face is covered with blood, the cop continues telling her that she is under arrest and acting as if he did nothing wrong. Number 19. A female officer punches a handcuffed woman. How uncalled for was the violence in the following video, we can conclude, considering that even this female officer's colleagues reacted and tried to stop her. As they were arresting this woman that we see cuffed, she tried to stand up. While this could be a worrisome move in some cases here, it certainly doesn't appear so. Hence, the beating that this woman receives seems uncalled for. After multiple punches to the woman's face, the police officers push their colleague away from the suspect and try to understand if the woman is okay. Number 20. An officer pulls over his daughter's partner. Why don't we bring this list to a close with quite a weird case of police brutality? In all the previous videos that we have seen, the officers acted brutally towards the civilians whom they didn't personally know. This next case is very different, and the brutal conduct of this cop is clearly very intimately driven. This cop pulled over a man that he recognized as his daughter's boyfriend. The cop walks around the car and shows his violent attitude by opening the driver's doors. This could have been a sign that something was wrong, and what confirms it is that immediately after opening the door, the cop claimed that the boy was going to jail. Apparently decisive to end his own career, as the alleged suspect is moving towards the back of the police car, he tells the boy that he will come up with a reason for his arrest on the go. Once this officer realizes that his daughter is in the back of the car he has stopped, he pulls her out, and we can clearly see she doesn't like being treated in this way. The girl kept crying, but he ignored her and took her away in the back of the police vehicle. As if this wasn't enough, it was found out later that his daughter even threatened suicide if she was separated from her boyfriend. Naturally, the officer was fired from the department. Now that we have been through these 20 cases of police brutality, we have seen that even those who are tasked with protecting us can cause a lot of uncalled harm. Nevertheless, we shouldn't forget that these unfortunate events don't necessarily represent all the law enforcers, and that there is a reason that these are called incidents and not just normal police work. Like in many of the cases, we have seen that justice doesn't turn a blind eye even to the law enforcers who show this inappropriate behavior. Thank you for following us through this list.